Hi, everyone, and welcome to our very first episode of How to Train for Aging with PhD, retired veterinarian, author, and world Ironman triathlete, Kevin Morgan. And he's one of my favorite advocates for what's called peripheral artery disease, which is blockages mainly in the leg arteries. 3 in 5 people who suffer a heart attack have it. Most don't even know it until it reaches advanced stages, though, where heart attack, stroke, and even possibly amputation are imminent. But it can come with some debilitating pain. But Kevin has documented all of the ways in which he's been able to persevere with the pain, the debilitating pain of peripheral artery disease, and how he's able to train and compete at a world triathlon. And I think, Kevin, where is it next year? Is it still going to be in Sweden?
Well, if I were to qualify, the Worlds are in New Zealand. Now, whether I can afford to go there is another story. I have to qualify at the race in October, and there's no way of knowing what happens. That all depends on the competition and how well your race goes.
Exactly. And he's very serious about this training. He wrote a book called How to Train for Aging. That's why we're calling this series How to Train for Aging. And this is the first in the series that we're going to be doing with Kevin. And he wrote another book, How to Fight the Crippling Pain of Peripheral Artery Disease, which makes sense. And one of the issues that patients always have is with their toes and the lack of circulation in their toes, even when their arteries are revascularized and blood flow is restored through the main vessels. It's still hard to get that circulation to maintain in the toes. And so Kevin is a big proponent of something called yoga toes. And so, Kevin, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yoga toes, how you discovered that this is something that would help not only you, but others with PAD?
Sure. Well, first I need to tell you why I have PAD. Is back in my 30s, I was working in Switzerland, and we ran some of my blood through the lab because we were running platelet function studies. And there I discovered I have a very severe dyslipidemia, a hypertriglyceridemia. Ideally, your triglycerides need to be below about 150 milligram per deciliter. My fasting triglycerides were over 2,000. My
Wow.
plasma looked like clotted cream. But worse, HDLs are best over, high density lipoproteins are best over 40, because they are responsible in part for reverse cholesterol transport and pulling it out of tissues. Mine was less than 20. I tried diet for quite a while. I tried to control it with a lot of fish oil. And then I came to America, and a physician prescribed statins, which really didn't do much good. I didn't have a hypercholesterolemia. The statins inhibit HMG-CoA reductase, the first step in cholesterol biosynthesis. I had a hypertriglyceridemia and a low HDL. And so I found out how toxic statins are as a result of seeing some slides a friend gave me of statin-treated rats. And so I wouldn't take them anymore. And then fortunately, I started Ironman training. When I got on full distance Ironman, after about a year, I checked my blood lipids, and my triglycerides were up, were down below 150, and my HDL was at 79. So Ironman training completely corrected my dyslipidemia, which is probably why I'm on this call today, because my triglycerides could have created pancreatic inflammation. And of course, they eventually induce arteriosclerosis, which has just started. I noticed first problems with running marathons, numb feet, and pain in my calves in 2014. In 2015, during a routine check of my abdominal aortic aneurysm stent graft, they ran an ABI test and showed I had moderately severe blockage of my popliteal and other arteries in my lower leg. That is slowly progressing, and so is my training. And so here I had an interesting problem, but because I have training in pathology, I started to think about the problem, and I systematically tried to find ways to improve blood flow to, through, and back from my feet. Well, and this brings us to yoga toes. So the first thing, and it's very easy to do, is to start spreading your toes and become aware of your toes. I developed about 10, maybe 12 now, different things I do to improve blood flow to my feet. And some of them are very odd, but they work. Anyway, so if you look at the anatomy of the foot, you'll notice there are arteries running down between your metatarsals. And so when your feet hurt, you tend to scrunch them up. That is exactly the worst thing to do. It inhibits capillary, arteriolar, and venous blood flow. It's really, you don't want to do that. You want to spread your toes, but the goal is to spread your metatarsals so you don't put pressure on those arteries, and you free up the capillary beds to return blood back to the venous system. So I found that by spreading my toes, which I've been doing before then, really actually helps quite a bit with vascular supply to and through my feet. And so I recommended that as one of the techniques in that book that was mentioned by Kim. And so you start spreading your toes with yoga toes. For some people, that's the first time in their life they've taken foot care really seriously. There's a tendency for us to stuff our feet in shoes and forget them. That is fatal. It's a really bad idea. By the way, I do not approve of compression wear. That is also the opposite of what you want to do in the case of PAD, simply based upon lower limb fluid mechanics. It makes no sense at all. You want to do exactly the opposite. You never wear tube socks. That makes it worse. Don't wear shoes with a small toe box. That makes it worse. But back to yoga toes, it's the perfect place to start thinking about foot health and making them healthier. And fortunately, for many years, I've worked on body movement, and I've had a lot of different teachers who've helped me a great deal. And one of them was Rebecca Amos Lawson, who teaches body movement. She's a dance teacher, and she taught me continuum for a while, improved my posture. We started making videos together. She co-authored a couple of my books a while ago. And so I think if you watch this video, it's fairly short. Rebecca will explain to you how to use yoga toes.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. And Pauline wrote into Fit Old Dog's blog about a question around the yoga toes that he posted, and would that be helpful for arthritis? So I'm just going to show first that we have a model of a foot and how many little joints there are in the foot. And when we have arthritis or other conditions where the foot cannot articulate all of these joints, then we don't get full range of movement and we get pain. So one of the things that we might want to do just to prepare the toes for getting the yoga toes on is just taking your fingers and circling and see if you can begin to articulate the little joints. When you do something like running that has repetitive movement on it, there often is a density and pressure buildup. So micro movements, little variations of ways to move all the joints in the foot are going to help open up the fluid nature of the tissue and help dissolve those compressed patterns. So once you've begun to move each little joint and maybe separate the toes, move them back and forth, next you get to try to put the little gel packs on. And sometimes putting something like a little bit of lotion can help if your feet are tight. But as you slide this in between each toe, you'll already, just from the nature of putting them on, can you see this? Is this good? From the nature of putting them on, you can feel the stretch of the foot. You might see these veins starting to move, the long bones. And then I just start to micro move. I just move my foot around, all these different little variations. I can scrunch, I can stretch, I can try to touch one toe down at a time. All these little ways will start to open up all the joints and articulations in the foot. One other thing that can be helpful is making sound is a good way to open the fluid in the tissue. And the bones are filled with fluid. And the fascia that gets very tight in arthritis, we're going to want to be more in a wave motion than in that tight buildup. So by moving your toes and making the sound that sounds like a J and a Z, sort of like a buzzing sound, it penetrates bone tissue. And so I can play with my toes and touch them, play with my foot and wiggle them as I That might be enough, but as you're ready to just progress a little bit more, standing on them and seeing how much you can go over that toe hinge and roll to the outside and the inside, and letting the toes come up and point will be another layer of getting more and more articulation and movement. And when I take this off and I stand, I feel a lot more activity and spread of this foot that can move than the one that hasn't had the yoga toes on. So as a beginner, I would suggest doing one foot at a time because it's really nice to compare the difference. That's all for now.
Wow. I mean, you know what's interesting is, let me go and get that off. There we are. You know, nothing could ever be smooth, right, with YouTube. But I was curious, the sound that she was making, I actually could feel that. I don't know about anyone else who's in our live studio audience right now, but I could actually feel that deep into my soul almost when she was doing that. Is there a reasoning behind that for those particular sounds, the J, the you know, J and S, or J and Z?
Absolutely. You're seeking resonances inside of the tissue. I spent quite a lot of years studying waveforms in biological systems, use of Fourier analysis for that kind of thing. And then I went to take lessons from, it started with me saying I don't enjoy dance. I've never been able to enjoy dance. And she swore she could get me to enjoy dance. She failed and gave up. I remember her asking me when I got really excited about something, and I thought back and I thought, well, there was this integral that I really had trouble with, and eventually I resolved it and I was very excited. So it turns out I have an Asperger's phenotype so my relationship to emotion is kind of a little distant. And so you're getting into the vibrations of the body. And so she was teaching me that. It's called continuum, where you use sound to open up areas of your body. I found it worked to some extent, but not so well for me. For others, it works extremely well. I prefer using my mind. You can improve the flow of blood to your feet by thinking better flow to your feet. People forget the amount of control their mind has over their body. But that'll be a subject of a later book. I just want to say that book I wrote on how to train for aging, I got some complaints from people saying there wasn't enough detail on training in the book. Well, that wasn't the objective. I mean, how can I tell people I don't know how they should train? And so in response to that, I thought, well, there are like 10 or 12 major things in the book I say you need to work on. You know, attention to your feet, attention to balance, attention to nutrition and flexibility. And so I've decided to write 10 separate, very short books focusing on each of those points in detail, along with exercises. And the first one I wrote was about toes, and including the emotional challenges of PAD is more an emotional stressor than anything, because you feel trapped in this horrible disease. So there will be 10 of these books, which I'll then lump with the original book on how to train for aging as a box set, which I'll sell at a reasonable price. So now I'm working on book number 3, which is how to overcome major physical setbacks. And a lot of that depends on your training and your determination. But this is about toes. So meeting Rebecca was great, but I've had a lot of really good body movement teachers. I spent 5 years studying Feldenkrais, a couple of years on yoga for athletes, time with Pilates. There's so many of these techniques that will help you get in touch with your body. So yes, no, the vibrations do have an effect, but I tend to prefer quiet, so I didn't really get into the noisy aspect of it too much.
It's interesting. Our YouTube producer Joshua was saying that Qigong has 7 healing sounds, so it completely makes sense.
Yeah, Qigong. I studied Qigong Iron Shirt, and it was fascinating. But each one of these things is a lifetime's work. Every one of these different techniques. So yeah, no, the sounds really do work. And there are waveforms throughout your body. There are waves passing everywhere. Your whole, if you look at quantum mechanics, it would say there were actually exist as probability waves. I mean, waveforms are key in all dynamic systems. And so that makes sense of why continuum will be effective if you do it well.
And I just want to take a moment to remind everyone that the advice and views offered are that of our speakers, of Kevin, of myself, and of whomever may share their story or questions or insights as well during this program. Make sure you do not take any advice or any information here and act upon it. Always check with your own healthcare provider for explicit consent to make sure that any information or any advice offered is actually appropriate for your situation. And that being said, if you do want to check out his books and you do want to get on his mailing list, you can go to Inspirational Self-Help Books. It's a big one. Inspirational Self-Help Books.com, and his How to Train for Aging and How to Fight the Crippling Pain of Peripheral Artery Disease are also on Amazon, and they're available by Kindle. And for those who can't afford them, you can always go ahead and reach out to Kevin, and he does have some online PDFs as well that he sometimes does provide. But I want to open it up to anyone who has any questions for Kevin. We get a lot of questions in the groups all the time, and I just appreciate you, Kevin, so much for taking the time every time I say, oh, Kevin, I'm tagging Kevin in our network, because you're so good about answering so many questions whenever we tag you, and no matter how many times it's the same thing over and over again. And especially with the yoga toes, everyone always asks about yoga toes, and it seems to be the number one thing that those who have tried it say it really works. It just described, though, because some have described to me that the next day and even 2 days later they get a little bit of the 2-day, second day sores from doing it, because it actually surprisingly really works those muscles. So for those people who are just trying it out, do you have any guide for the first time in doing it so that they can minimize the, next day and second day sores? Or is that a good thing?
But no, always little and often, but initially for a very short while, and see how you feel the next day and the second day, because often effects are worse or more clear on the second day after you've done something. And then after that, it's little and often. And now I can spread my toes without the yoga toes. And while I run, I spread my toes. But that's another long story about how I run using these things. But yeah, start with a short period of making sure you're comfortable. If you have issues with your feet, you may have it may, irritate a bunion or something like that. Then you have to work with it. If it does irritate a bunion, then maybe you don't want to put the separator between the big toe and the toe next to it. Maybe you do. It's a matter of exploration of your body. I mean, and so, you say go check with your physician on everything you do. I can honestly say that most general physicians know very little about body movement. And so you're better to go to a body movement person. In fact, before you start any kind of training, and I did this, go to a PT and get a general assessment. Because my PT I went 2 years ago found I had very weak adductor muscles on the inside of my thighs. So I had to strengthen those before I got into serious training. Anyway, I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does. And does it matter which yoga toes that you get?
The ones that work for you.
I went on and there were so many different ones. There were thin ones, wide ones, and I saw the ones that your friend had in the video. And I definitely could get those, but there are all kinds of different ones out there that are available.
Yeah, I like those because they're made of a kind of jelly, but they do separate your toes quite a lot.
So it doesn't matter really which ones.
It's whatever works for you. You can use your fingers, but that's quite difficult and uncomfortable. But you can start there and see how wide you can separate your toes, and then look at different ones online and see if there's one that isn't too much of a separator. Or you can find in an old junk shop an old pair of Vibram shoes and stick your feet in them, because they separate your toes, but not by a lot. You could probably get them, for almost nothing, because they've gone out of fashion. So the ones that work for you is always the answer to everything.
And Marcia, I think, may have a question. She unmuted, so I wanted to see if she wanted to jump in. Marcia?
Oh, me? I'm sorry if you're talking to me. I don't.
You don't? Okay,
No.
I just was making sure you unmuted, so I thought you
Sorry.
might have a question. You're always really good with great insight, and you're one of the ones that we've talked about yoga toes a couple of times and which one to do. But I'm curious for Kevin as well. You mentioned that you run in these. You run with these yoga toes, these big thick gel, or do you have a
No,
different
no, I do not
modified
run.
version?
I do not run in yoga toes, and I don't like vibrant shoes. I can separate my toes without needing the yoga toes because I've done it so often. So I will spread my toes consciously as I run.
Oh,
And
oh, got it.
also, I use my toes in running efficiently to engage the muscles of my feet, but that will be a subject of book 4.
We'll have to wait for book 4. So I'm curious. So should we do the same thing when we're walking? Now I'm going to be more conscious of my toes when I walk. I have Betty Rubble feet, if you know Betty Rubble. Yabba dabba doo. So my feet are I don't have the typical really long big toe. My toes are all straight across. So I have a very wide foot anyway. So I have to get a wide toe box no matter what for all my shoes. So I could spread my toes just a little bit, and that works with walking as well.
Yeah, I definitely spread my toes as I walk and run because I want to encourage blood flow through my feet. So if you have PAD, I mean, you've got to do anything you can to get blood to and back, through and back from your feet. And it's quite difficult and complex. I mean, I engage the muscles of my feet to improve venous return. And so this is just number one is awareness of your toes. Another good thing to do that's not in that video, I think, was toe yoga, where you lift your big toe and leave the other toes down, or lift the other toes and, and lift your big toes. So you practice moving your toes. I went into a bar once somewhere, and there was a guy drinking a beer at the bar, and I realized he had no arms. He was holding a beer mug in his feet. When we underestimate the power of our feet, we've neglected our feet horribly, and the shoe industry has made it worse with these big padded heel shoes. They're basically orthotics. You don't want to, they're a really bad idea, but don't get me started on that. I mean,
It's interesting that you say that you saw someone who didn't have any arms that they were using their feet. My neighbor many years ago actually was the same, and I couldn't believe she would literally do everything with her feet. She had the best balance in the world. She could grab onto handles of pots, and she could
yeah,
feed herself with forks. I mean, it was amazing what her toes could do.
yes, and we all have that potential ability, but it takes a lot of work.
Yeah, a lot of work, a lot of training. And that's why, she was born that way so she could start from when she was a kid. And when you start when you're a kid, it's a lot easier to train. But now that we're older, um, you can teach a fit dog new tricks, but what about an old dog new tricks?
Well, that book, The Brain That Changes Itself, is worth reading because that gives you hope. You can actually make more improvements than people realize, but you have to have discipline and you have to be prepared to deal with discomfort. When it comes to discomfort with PAD, it's actually pain. When I run, I'm handling pain. And the advantage of being a triathlete is competitive cycling is all about pain control. It's extremely painful sport. And you get to know the difference between good pain and bad pain. Good pain is training, bad pain is injury. And so you have to know. But if you want to improve blood flow with PAD, you're going to have to put up with some serious discomfort in order to improve the blood flow. And you have to increase your awareness of what's going on in your body. So there are many things you can do to get around better. I mean, for instance, you can learn how to move with your whole body, walking or running, and take the load off your legs. That's another skill that I'll talk about that's mentioned in my book, but it's a thing I've been studying for years. And I would say that Feldenkrais helped me most with that.
And I think that would be actually a subject for maybe the second in our series, how to move with your whole body. So I'm thinking whenever we schedule that, hopefully we're hoping in the future we could do these weekly, depending on your schedule, because I think this is fascinating. And I think there's so much content that we could continue to do. But we do have Douglas that's here. He has a question for you. Douglas, go ahead and unmute and ask our friend Kevin your question.
Hey, Kevin, fascinating. I've been reading some of your stuff. It's fascinating. But when I do wood burning, so when I'm sitting on my couch, I don't have my shoes on. I always wear my socks. But my feet constantly move, and I notice I'm moving up and down on my toes like calf raises. Is that helping my toes any in the circulation? I don't feel like I crunch them up, but I feel like they're always my feet constantly move. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And in the morning, the bottoms of my feet are always uncomfortable. So I wiggle my toes and my ankles and my knees, and that discomfort goes away because I'm waking up. The collaterals, the problem with collaterals we build, they have a tendency to close because they don't really want to be there. They're being invented by your body. So any movement you do is helpful. Anything that expands the tissues down by your feet, between your toes, in your toes, in the, anywhere in your feet helps. So no, this kind of movement is really important. People tend not to do it because of the pain, and because I know my feet get pretty numb sometimes, and movement fixes it, but you have to get past the discomfort. So no, you're doing the right thing, Douglas.
Cool.
Sitting in front of a fire wiggling your toes sounds pretty good to me.
That does to me. How many times did you say we should be doing this during the day? Is there a set time, like do it for 5 minutes, do it for 10 minutes each session? What do you think?
I would say do it when it feels right. It always comes down to what feels right. If you overdo it, you'll have sore feet the next day. And so do what feels right at the pace that suits you. If your PhD is fairly advanced and you haven't been working on your feet, you're going to have to start off with very little and then gradually spread things out. But wiggling your toes, that's something any of us can do. Get rid of tube socks. They're really bad. They contract your feet all the time, and it's very subtle because the tissue, the cloth isn't very elastic. So, but it's constantly pulling your feet in, and that you want to avoid that. So now I've given up wearing socks at all in my running shoes. The only time I wear socks is in hiking boots, and so I don't wear socks for running or walking at all now. It allows my feet to spread.
Wow, I would get blisters.
You can strengthen them and have the right kind of shoes. I use
Okay.
Nike Freeze now. I'm back on Nike Freeze. Sue suggested them again. I used them years ago, and I don't think my feet were strong enough back then, but now they are. And so I'm back on Nike Freeze, which are basically a piece of rubber under your foot. Did anybody read the book? Did you read the book Born to Run?
No, I haven't read it, but I've seen you promote it.
Yeah, it's an interesting book as long as you don't do something stupid like running the streets where there's glass and wires and stuff. But running on the sand and grass is good. That's an interesting book. And the Tarahumara Indians, the only shoes they had were car tires tied on with thongs, and they would run miles and miles. So you just need something to protect the bottom of your feet, and you need shoes that provide you with the maximum of flexibility in the shoe. And the support doesn't want to be coming from the shoe, which is, I think, been pushed at us by the shoe industry, creating what really aren't shoes anymore. They're basically orthotics. We don't need that. You need to if you use crutches long enough, you'll find you can't walk without them. And they've done that to our shoes. And so the strength needs to be in your feet and your lower limbs, not in your shoes. But you have to make the transition slowly and wisely.
And I want to make the point that, according to doctors that we work with, if you are a diabetic, pre-diabetic, numbness in your feet at all, you do need to make sure that you go overboard and protect your feet, because you could be a toe stub away from amputation. You just never know if you have enough blood flow getting to your feet to heal any sort of wound that may arise that you may not even feel in its early stages. So just be very careful and talk to your medical team to make sure what's right for you. We do have Heinz that's here and has a question. He wants to know, Kevin, do you also soak your feet? And if so, what do you use besides water? Now, I want to cover it because, again, people with diabetes are told to make sure you don't want to soak your feet, especially if you have neuropathy, because it's so easy to get cuts on your feet when you do soak them. But we have heard from a couple of functional medicine practitioners that we've had on our broadcast before that soaking your feet just a little bit for a few minutes in warm water with some Epsom salts is something that can allow some of the critical minerals like magnesium to absorb into your body transdermally.
Well, to answer your question, the only time I soak my feet is when I'm standing in the shower or doing swim training, which I have to do a lot of, obviously. So I don't do that. I don't think you want to be softening your skin up too much by soaking your feet for a long time and then walking on them. You know, because it would soften up your skin. That doesn't seem a very good idea. But no, I don't do that. I've never found it helpful, but it might help someone else.
Yeah, we talk about an alternative. If you are trying to get the extra nutrients into your body, you might want to try something, you know, like a magnesium oil or something that you can just put on your skin as well when you're doing your regular regimen. I know that, you know, also it was mentioned about putting cream. You don't want to put cream in between your toes, according to our podiatrist, Dr. David Alper, as well, especially if you do have diabetes. You want to be careful of that. But I want to open it up again for anyone who might have any more questions, or else we'll get our final thoughts from Kevin, and we will let you know. Make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as his. I think your Fit Old Dog is your YouTube channel, correct?
Yeah, all one
Fit
word.
Old Dog is his YouTube channel. I believe it would be youtube.com/Fit Old Dog. And you can go ahead and like and subscribe. He puts up a lot of content as well. You can sign up for his newsletter and find out more about his books at inspirationalselfhelpbooks.com. And it's really great. I love his newsletter. But you can also find his books on Amazon. And with that, I don't see anyone else with raised hands. I'm hoping this was really valuable. Definitely valuable for me. I'm sitting here still stretching my toes. Just subconsciously, I caught myself widening my toes just after listening to you. So you've definitely had an impact on me. Douglas does have one more question. So Douglas, go ahead and unmute and ask Kevin your question.
So, and I was just thinking about one of the things you could help us with is stretching before we run or after we run. The importance of that is something that
One of my books will be entirely on flexibility. The term stretching, I don't really like. It's really lengthening. My approach to stretching is never stretch a cold muscle, always warm them up first. And number two, remember, it's a conversation you're having with your body, not something you're doing to your body. And if you have a muscle that's giving you trouble, remember it's alive and be extremely polite because it's in charge of its behavior. So yes, lengthening muscles is really important. You can call it stretching, that's fine, but it has to be done in a way that you don't, if you stretch a muscle too fast, it will reflexly contract. You can use active isolated stretching where if you want to stretch your hamstrings, contract your quads, it will reflexly cause your hamstrings to relax because of opposing muscle groups. So stretching is or muscle lengthening is going to be the subject of one of my upcoming books of the 10 books, and flexibility is extremely important.
okay. I have one more too. Like shoes, you talk about not wearing socks. Now, for those of us that hike and we wear hiking boots, I don't think I could wear my hiking boots without some type of sock because is that so?
I
Is
think
there
Douglas, I said the only time I wear socks is in my hiking boots, and I always
okay?
I wear wool socks, not cotton. Cotton is really bad. I wear those wool socks. What are they called? Smart wool, and they work for me really well. They're wide, they're not tube, they don't compress my feet. Yeah, no, you're right. There's no way, Douglas, I would go hiking without wool socks personally.
So what are they called?
Smart wool are the ones I use, which I really like because they come with a very wide front, you know, at the tip of the toe. So that
Okay.
anything that compresses my feet and squeezes them laterally is a bad idea. And those smart wool socks don't do that. And once you've worn them in, I mean, they really are comfortable. And plus, you know, the materials in wool are good for your skin.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. We really appreciate you being on. I'm just going to put up a shot of your book, you know, right here on Amazon so people can see how to fight the crippling pain of peripheral artery disease. There's the book, and you can see Kevin Thomas Morgan. You can look it up on Amazon, and then I'm going to go to inspirational. You can see I go to it often. inspirationalselfhelpbooks.com, and you can hear more about his story and how to train for aging, and see all of the different blog posts. He posts a lot, so make sure you can connect with him and sign up for his newsletter. But we appreciate you, Kevin, so much coming on. I don't know if we're going to be doing this again next week. You'll have to let me know, but we're going to try and continue the How to Train for Aging series. And I think the next one, we're going to go how to walk with your entire body. So again, go to inspirationalselfhelpbooks.com, go to his YouTube channel, youtube.com/FitOldDog. And you can also find his books on Amazon. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and a special thanks to Dr. Kevin Morgan.
I miss Douglas's smiling face.
I know. We love seeing it.
Thanks, Kim.